Now that our camera is a little bit delayed in following the player, what we can see as we're running along here now, as we walk along, we can see that the camera is actually, or not the camera, but the screen space ahead of the player is a lot shorter than what's behind the player, which is obviously not very good for a game that we're running around shooting things. We want to be able to see what things we're shooting at. We're not really too worried about what's behind us. That shouldn't really concern us too much. So what we can do is add a value for the camera to follow a little bit ahead of the player, so that it kind of cancels, not so much cancel it out, but what we actually want to do is create more space ahead of the player than what's behind the player. So what we can do is go into our camera controller. We're going to create a new value that we'll call public float move ahead. And then on our lerp that we're moving the camera, instead of just being target position.x, what we're actually going to do is add on our move ahead value. But we also want to make sure that our move ahead value depends on which way our player is facing. So if our player is facing to the right, we want to add on the move ahead value. But if the player is facing to the left, we would want to subtract that value so that the camera would move to the left. So what we can do is, instead of just adding move ahead, we can add some brackets around it and then multiply our move ahead by our target, which is our player, target.localscale.x. So if our player gets flipped around, so his local scale is minus value, then we know that our move ahead value will also be multiplied by a minus value. So therefore our move ahead will now be, say if our move ahead was 3, now it'll be minus 3. So we can save that, go back into the game, let it compile, and we'll go to our camera. Give it a second to let once the compiling is finished, we'll get a new value appearing. There we go. So we'll just set it to 3 for now, and we should see. So now if we jump up here, we can see when we're standing still, now we have a bunch of space ahead of the player. And when we're running along, the player isn't quite in the middle of the screen. He's still got a little bit of space ahead of him. But now we're able to see a little bit more of what's going on around us. But we also still get to retain the lerp of the camera. So the camera is still like catching up with us as we go along. Let's change the move ahead a little bit. So we can see if we have a bunch more space ahead of us, as we flick back and forward, we can be shooting if there's different enemies in different places and stuff. But we have what's most important now is we're able to see ahead of us, so we can challenge any enemies coming towards us. But we still have enough space behind us to, if we're getting attacked from behind, we can react quickly, turn around, or we can jump out of harm's way, whichever is kind of the more appropriate response at the time. But as you can see, just moving the camera that little bit forward ahead increases it adds an extra dimension to how the game is played, again without actually adding anything complicated to the game itself.